Chapter 1. Saladin, a world divided. Before Saladin became a name whispered with respect by allies and enemies, he was simply a man born into a fractured world. The Middle East of the 12th century was not unified. It was divided politically, religiously, and psychologically. Muslim lands, once part of a vast caliphate, had splintered into competing states. Rival rulers fought each other for control, draining strength that might have resisted external threats. And into that division came the Crusaders. From Europe, armies driven by faith, ambition, and opportunity crossed into the Levant. They came with steel and conviction, with a belief they were reclaiming something sacred. Jerusalem fell. Something deeper than territory was lost. It was not just a city, but a symbol of faith, identity, and continuity. Its loss echoed across the Islamic world, but the response was not unity, it was hesitation. Division weakens even the strongest causes. Saladin was born into this reality in 1137 in Tikrit. His family was Kurdish, not part of the dominant Arab elite. He was not born into power, nor destined for greatness. His early life did not suggest a conqueror. He was educated and thoughtful, more inclined toward scholarship than war. They saw a man of discipline, intelligence, and restraint. But history does not always select the obvious. Sometimes it selects those who can adapt. Saladin's path into power began not with ambition, but with proximity. His uncle, Shirkuh, was a general under Nur ad-Din, one of the few Muslim leaders actively resisting Crusader expansion. Through Shirkuh, Saladin entered the world of politics and war, not as a leader, as an observer. This distinction matters, because Saladin learned before he commanded. He watched how power operated, not just on battlefields, but in courts, alliances, and rivalries. He saw how victories could be undone by ego, how strength could collapse without unity. Egypt became the turning point. At the time, Egypt was ruled by the Fatimid Caliphate, weakened and unstable. Both Crusaders and Muslim forces sought influence there. Shirkuh led campaigns into Egypt, and Saladin accompanied him. What he encountered was not just war but complexity, competing interests, fragile alliances, political maneuvering beneath military action. When Shirkuh died unexpectedly, Saladin was placed in a position few had anticipated, Vizier of Egypt. He was young, inexperienced in ruling, surrounded by factions that did not trust him. From the outside, it looked temporary. But Saladin understood something essential. Power is rarely given to those who are ready. It is given to those who can survive it. Instead of ruling through force, he ruled through balance. He maintained order, stabilized administration, and gradually consolidated authority. He did not provoke unnecessary conflict. He waited, and in that patience, something began to form. Not just power, but vision. Saladin saw what others had failed to achieve, that defeating the Crusaders would not come from isolated victories. It would require unity. Not symbolic unity, but functional unity. Political, military, and ideological alignment across fragmented territories. This was not a short-term goal. It was a long-term restructuring, and it would require more than strength. It would require legitimacy, because in a divided world, authority must be earned, imposed. Saladin began to build that legitimacy quietly, through governance, through alliances, through reputation. He positioned himself not just as a ruler, but as a stabilizing force, someone who could restore order where there had been fragmentation. And slowly, the perception changed. He was no longer just a vizier. He was becoming something more dangerous, a unifier. But unification is never neutral. It disrupts existing power structures. It creates resistance. It forces confrontation. And as Saladin's influence grew, so did the inevitability of conflict, because a divided world can tolerate many leaders, but it cannot tolerate one who seeks to bring it together. Chapter 2: Saladin, the rise of unity power, once obtained, is rarely stable. It must be reinforced, justified, and expanded. It begins to dissolve. When Saladin became vizier of Egypt, he did not inherit a unified state. He inherited a fragile system, one already eroding from within. Egypt, under the Fatimid Caliphate, was politically weakened and religiously divided. The ruling structure lacked authority. The military was fragmented. Loyalties were uncertain. Saladin's position was not secure. It was temporary unless he could make it permanent. But permanence does not come from force alone. It comes from legitimacy. And Saladin understood that before he could unite the Islamic world, he had to resolve the contradictions within Egypt itself. The quiet transformation of power. Instead of declaring dominance, Saladin moved gradually. He maintained outward stability while restructuring internally. He replaced unreliable officials, strengthened administrative control, reorganized military command. But his most significant move was not military, it was ideological. The Fatimid Caliphate followed Shia Islam, while much of the surrounding Islamic world, including Nur ad-Din's domain, followed Sunni Islam. This division was not just theological, it was political. It fragmented identity. Saladin made a decisive move. He ended the Fatimid Caliphate, not through dramatic confrontation, but through calculated transition. The name of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad replaced the Fatimid ruler in Friday prayers. This single act reoriented Egypt religiously, politically, symbolically. It aligned Egypt with the broader Sunni world. No battle, no spectacle, just a shift in recognition. And with that, Egypt became his. Between loyalty and independence, but Saladin was not yet fully independent. He still operated, technically, under Nur ad-Din, powerful ruler of Syria and one of the primary Muslim leaders opposing the Crusaders. This created tension because Saladin's growing power in Egypt made him both an asset and a potential rival. For a time, he remained loyal, publicly respectful, strategically aligned. But beneath that loyalty, something else was forming: autonomy. He was building his own base, his own army, his own system of governance. Not in rebellion, but in preparation. Because Saladin understood something critical. Unity imposed by another ruler would never be complete. If the Islamic world were to be unified effectively, it would require a single center of authority. And that center, increasingly, was becoming him. The death that changed everything. In 1174, Nur ad-Din died. Suddenly, the structure that had balanced power across the region collapsed. His successors were not as strong. His territories became vulnerable to fragmentation, exactly the condition Saladin believed had weakened the Islamic world in the first place. Now, the opportunity and the responsibility shifted. Saladin moved, not recklessly, not violently, strategically. He advanced into Syria not as a conqueror, but as a stabilizer. He presented himself as the one who could preserve order, continue resistance against the Crusaders, and prevent internal collapse. Some resisted, others accepted. But over time, his influence expanded. Damascus fell under his control. Other cities followed, not always through battle, but through negotiation, alliance, and calculated pressure. This was not conquest in the traditional sense. It was consolidation. Unity as strategy, not ideology. Saladin's vision of unity was not purely ideological. It was strategic. He understood that the Crusader states, though smaller, were unified in purpose. Their strength came not from numbers, but from coordination. In contrast, Muslim lands had resources, population, and geography, but lacked cohesion. Unity would change that balance. But unity required more than territory. It required trust. Saladin cultivated a reputation that distinguished him from other rulers. He was disciplined, measured, and most importantly predictable. He did not rule through fear alone. He ruled through consistency. This made alliances possible. It made submission acceptable. It made resistance less certain. The shape of what was coming by the end of this phase, Saladin controlled Egypt and large parts of Syria. But more importantly, he controlled direction. For the first time in decades, the Islamic world was not just reacting to Crusader expansion. It was preparing to challenge it systematically, deliberately, inevitably. Saladin had not yet faced his greatest battles, but he had already achieved something just as important. He had transformed fragmentation into structure, and once structure exists, power can move through it. Chapter 3: Saladin, the test of strength. Unity creates potential, but potential, untested, is only theory. By the time Saladin had consolidated Egypt and much of Syria, he had achieved what many before him could not: a degree of cohesion across fragmented lands. Resources were aligned, armies could coordinate, command structures were clearer, but none of this mattered yet, because the Crusader states still stood, and they had not been idle. An enemy that had adapted. The Crusaders were no longer the chaotic wave that had first entered the region decades earlier. They had become rooted politically and militarily. Kingdoms like Jerusalem, Antioch, and Tripoli had developed systems of defense. Fortresses dotted the landscape. Supply lines connected coastal strongholds to inland territories. Alliances both internal and with European powers reinforced their position. They had learned, and learning changes the nature of conflict. This would not be a simple campaign. It would be a test, not just of military strength, but of endurance, coordination, and decision-making under pressure. The first movements. Saladin did not rush into a decisive confrontation. He probed. Raids into Crusader territories tested responses. Smaller engagements measured reaction times, discipline, and adaptability. He observed how quickly forces mobilized, how commanders responded where weaknesses emerged. This was not hesitation, it was calibration, because Saladin understood that a unified force, newly formed, could still fracture under the strain of a large-scale defeat. Before risking everything, he needed to understand the limits of what he had built. The results were mixed. Some engagements favored his forces faster, more flexible, better suited to the terrain. Others revealed challenges, coordination gaps, overextension, and the difficulty of maintaining supply across large distances. Unity had created strength, but it had also introduced complexity, war beyond the battlefield. Saladin's strategy extended beyond direct confrontation. He targeted logistics. Caravans were intercepted, trade routes disrupted, economic pressure began to build. The Crusader states, heavily dependent on external support and internal stability, began to feel strain. This was not about immediate victory. It was about erosion. because wars are not always won by decisive battles. They are often won by making the enemy weaker before the decisive moment arrives. At the same time, Saladin reinforced his own systems. Supply lines were secured. Communication between regions improved. Commanders were tested, replaced, or promoted based on performance. He was not just fighting a war, he was refining an engine. The problem of impulse. Not all of Saladin's opponents were cautious. Some Crusader leaders favored aggressive action, raids into Muslim territory, attempts to provoke direct confrontation, demonstrations of strength meant to destabilize Saladin's growing authority. This created unpredictability, but also opportunity, because impulsive action often exposes vulnerability. Saladin began to exploit this. Rather than reacting emotionally to provocations, he responded selectively. He chose when to engage and when to withdraw. He avoided unnecessary losses, even when it meant appearing passive. This discipline was critical, because restraint in war is often mistaken for weakness. Until it isn't. Moments of friction. The period was marked not by a single defining battle, but by accumulation. Clashes at borders, skirmishes near fortresses, maneuvers that forced retreats or tested defenses. Each encounter added data. Each decision shaped the next. Saladin's forces improved not instantly, but progressively. Coordination tightened. Confidence grew. Command structures became more reliable under pressure. At the same time, the Crusader states began to recognize a shift. This was not the fragmented opposition they had faced before. This was something else, something organized, something patient, something building the edge of decision. By the end of this phase, the balance had not yet fully tipped. The Crusaders still held strong positions. Their fortifications remained intact. Their ability to defend had not collapsed. But the environment had changed. They were no longer expanding. They were reacting. And reaction, over time, limits options. Saladin, meanwhile, was moving closer to something he had been preparing for since the beginning, a decisive confrontation. Not a raid, not a skirmish, but a battle that would test everything at once: strategy, unity, endurance, and command. Because at some point, theory must become action, and action carries risk. The nature of the test Saladin faced, was not simply whether he could win. It was whether what he had built could survive the pressure of a defining moment. Because unity, under stress, can either solidify or break, and history often turns on which of those outcomes occurs. Chapter 4: Saladin, the Road to Hattin. Decisive battles are rarely accidents. They are constructed step by step, pressure by pressure, decision by decision, until the moment becomes unavoidable. For Saladin, that moment would come at Hattin. But before the battle, there was a process, a narrowing of options, provocation and response. Tension between Saladin and the Crusader states had been building steadily. Raids, counter-raids. They were part of the structure of conflict. But then came escalation. A Crusader lord, driven by ambition and defiance, violated agreements and attacked Muslim caravans moving through contested territory. These were not isolated acts of banditry. They were deliberate, strategical, reckless, depending on perspective. What mattered was the effect. Saladin now had justification, not just for retaliation, but for mobilization at scale. Because legitimacy in war is not only about strength, it is about narrative. And this narrative was clear. The balance had been broken, forcing the decision. Saladin did not march blindly toward confrontation. He created conditions that would force his enemies to move. The key was geography. He targeted Tiberius's strategically important location near the Sea of Galilee. Its fortress held significance, but more importantly, its position created a dilemma. If the Crusader army remained in place, they risked losing territory and appearing passive. If they marched to relieve Tiberius, they would have to cross arid Turender heat with limited water, exposed to harassment. It was not a trap in the conventional sense. It was a forced choice, and forced choices often lead to predictable outcomes. The march into constraint. The Crusader leadership faced division. Some advised caution, hold position, protect resources, avoid unnecessary risk. Others argued for action. Honor demanded response, and inaction would weaken authority. In the end, they chose movement. They marched, and in doing so, they entered the environment Saladin had prepared. The terrain was unforgiving. Heat drained strength. Water sources were limited and contested. Saladin's forces did not engage immediately in full battle. They shadowed, harassed, disrupted. Every mile forward cost the Crusader army energy it could not easily recover. This was not yet defeat, but it was degradation. Control of the field. By the time the Crusader army approached the area near Hattin, their condition had changed. They were tired, thirsty, disorganized, in ways not immediately visible, but operationally significant. Saladin, in contrast, controlled positioning. His forces had access to water. They occupied advantageous terrain. They were coordinated, prepared, and aligned under a single command structure. This asymmetry mattered, because battles are not only decided by numbers or courage, they are decided by condition. At Hattin, the structure of the confrontation became clear. Saladin did not rush into a chaotic clash. He contained his forces, surrounded the Crusader army, limiting movement, restricting access to water, and applying pressure in controlled phases. Smoke, heat, and continuous harassment compounded the stress. Arrows, cavalry maneuvers, and strategic positioning tightened the space. The Crusader army was no longer maneuvering, it was reacting. And reaction, under constraint, reduces effectiveness. Attempts to break through were made, but coordination had weakened. Fatigue had set in. Command decisions became harder to execute. And as cohesion eroded, the outcome moved from uncertain to probable. The collapse, when the final phase of the battle unfolded, it was not a sudden reversal. It was the culmination of everything that had come before. Exhaustion, dehydration, encirclement, pressure. The Crusader lines broke, not instantly, but irreversibly. Key leaders were captured, units fragmented. Resistance, though still present, no longer functioned as a unified force. The battle ended not just in defeat, but in disintegration. More than a victory, Hattin was not simply a military success. It was a structural turning point. The Crusader states had lost not only an army, but a level of strategic stability. Their ability to project strength had been severely compromised. Fortresses remained. Cities still stood, but the balance had shifted. And once balance shifts at that scale, consequences follow. The opening of a door for Saladin Hattin was not the end. It was the beginning of something larger. Because with the main field army of the Crusader states broken, the path to their most symbolic center, Jerusalem, was no longer protected. The question was no longer whether he could challenge their presence. It was how far he would go. and what kind of victory he intended to achieve. History often remembers battles, but what matters more is what those battles make possible. Hatton made something possible that had not been within reach for nearly a century, and once that possibility existed, could not be ignored. Chapter 5: Saladin, the Return of Jerusalem. Victory creates opportunity, but what follows victory defines legacy. After Hatton, Crusader resistance was gone. Their field army, once powerful, was broken. Strongholds remained, but they were now isolated, and at the center of all of it stood Jerusalem, the weight of a city. Jerusalem was not just strategic, it was symbolic. For nearly a century, it was under Crusader control. Its fall in 1099 was marked by violence, remembered by both sides. To reclaim Jerusalem was not simply to gain territory, it was to reverse history. But symbols carry risk. How they are reclaimed determines how they are remembered. The advanced Saladin moved methodically. Cities and fortresses fell in succession. Some resisted, taken by force. Others, recognizing the power shift, surrendered with negotiated terms. This was not chaos, it was sequence. Each success increased pressure on Jerusalem, materially and psychologically. Supplies became uncertain. Reinforcements diminished. Inside, leadership faced a dilemma: resist and risk destruction, or negotiate and preserve what remained. A siege, not a massacre. When Saladin's forces reached Jerusalem in 1187, confrontation was inevitable, but its nature was not predetermined. The memory of 1099, with widespread killing, still existed. Some expected retribution. Saladin chose differently. The siege applied pressure, military and psychological, but it was calibrated. The goal was surrender, not annihilation. Negotiations began. Terms were discussed, and eventually the city yielded. Terms of surrender. The agreement was not lenient by modern standards, but restrained in its context. Ransoms were established. Those who could pay were allowed to leave. Those who could not were, in some cases, freed through intervention, by commanders, by negotiated arrangements, by decisions that prioritized outcome over strict enforcement. There was no mass slaughter, no uncontrolled violence. Order was maintained. This mattered, because in a moment where revenge could have been justified, Saladin chose structure over impulse, restoration, not erasure. After the city changed hands, attention turned not to destruction, but to restoration. Islamic holy sites were cleansed and re-established. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque were restored, but other sites were not erased. They remained, because control of Jerusalem for Saladin was not about eliminating its complexity. It was about redefining authority within it. Reputation beyond victory. News of Jerusalem's fall spread rapidly. In the Islamic world, it was seen as a moment of restoration, of dignity regained. In Europe, it was shock, a call to action. But even among enemies, something else emerged: recognition. Saladin's conduct, his restraint, his discipline, his refusal to mirror past brutality, created a reputation that extended beyond cultural and religious boundaries. He was not just a conqueror, he was something more controlled, more deliberate, and therefore more difficult to dismiss. The paradox of power. By reclaiming Jerusalem, Saladin achieved what few thought possible. He had unified fragmented territories, defeated a major opposing force, taken the most symbolically significant city in the region. But success introduces a new variable, attention, because victories of this scale do not end conflicts, they expand them. What comes next? The fall of Jerusalem did not close the war, it transformed it. Europe would respond. New armies would come. The conflict would escalate into something broader, more complex, and more demanding than anything Saladin had faced before. Because reclaiming Jerusalem was one kind of challenge. Holding what had been gained, that was another. History often remembers the moment a city falls, but what matters just as much is what follows. Because victory is not the end of pressure, it is the beginning of a different kind. Chapter 6: The City Beneath the Dust, where memory refuses to die. The wind came low across the plain, dragging with it a fine veil of dust that never seemed to settle. To outsiders, it was just another barren stretch of land, featureless, exhausted, forgotten. But beneath that dust, layered in silence, lay a city older than memory, older than conquest. Zahir walked ahead without speaking, his steps steady, as if guided by something unseen. Layla followed, her scarf pulled tight across her face, though it did little to keep the dust out. Behind them, Karim dragged the small cart that carried what little they had left. "Are you sure it's here?" Karim asked, his voice hoarse from heat and doubt. "It's always been here. The question is whether we're ready to see it." Layla frowned. That was how Zahir spoke now, half in riddles, half in memory. Quieter, but also more certain, as if following a map written somewhere inside him. They walked another hour before the land began to shift. At first, it was subtle, the dust thinning just enough to reveal faint, unnatural lines, straight edges, angles. Layla knelt and brushed away sand, her fingers trembling slightly as stone emerged beneath her touch. Not just stone, cut stone. Her pulse quickened. "It's real," she whispered. Karim stared down beside her. "Or what's left of it." Zahir finally turned, his expression calm but firm. "Not what's left," he said. "What endures." He stepped forward and began clearing a wider space, pushing aside dust until a pattern revealed itself. Interlocking slabs, worn but unmistakably shaped by human hands. A road. Layla stood, her eyes scanning ahead. How far does it go? Zahir followed her gaze toward a shallow depression in the land. "Farther than you think." They followed it, and with every step the signs became clearer. Fragments of walls, broken columns, half-buried doorways opening into darkness. The skeleton of a city, long collapsed but not erased. Layla felt something stir in her chest, not quite hope, not quite grief, but recognition, as if the place knew her, as if it had been waiting. "People lived here," Karim said. "They didn't just live," Zahir replied. "They built something meant to last." Layla ran her fingers along a carved stone fragment, the markings faint but still present. Symbols, writing, she couldn't read them, yet she felt their weight. "What happened to them?" she asked quietly. Zahir paused, his voice low when he answered. "The same thing that happens to every civilization, that believes it cannot fall." They reached what must once have been a central square, the ground clearer, structures more defined. At its heart stood something that had not completely fallen, a wide, low structure from massive stone blocks. A temple, or something close to it. Layla felt her breath catch. It was damaged, cracked, partially collapsed, but its foundation remained unbroken, as if refusing to yield even to time. Zahir approached it slowly. "This is why we came." Karim frowned. "You brought us across half a wasteland for a ruin." Zahir shook his head for what's inside it. The entrance was partially buried, and it took them nearly an hour to clear enough debris to squeeze through. Inside, the air changed, cooler, still, almost untouched. The dust did not swirl here, it rested. Layla stepped forward, her eyes adjusting to dim light filtering through fractures in the ceiling. The walls were covered in carvings, more intricate than anything outside. Scenes of people, rivers flowing, fields green and full, cities alive with movement. It was not decoration, it was a record, a memory carved into permanence. Karim let out a low breath. They really thought this would last forever. Zahir walked deeper into the chamber, his voice echoing softly. Maybe they knew it wouldn't. Maybe that's why they made it. Layla followed, studying the carvings more closely. There were no battles, no kings raising swords, no enemies cast in defeat. Instead, there were people building, planting, teaching, carrying water, raising children. A civilization defined not by its wars, but by its continuity. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Why leave out the wars? She asked. Because war doesn't need to be remembered, Zahir said. It repeats itself. He stopped at the far end of the chamber, where the carvings gave way to a single, unbroken slab of stone. At its center was a symbol unlike the others. Simpler, deeper, carved with deliberate force. Layla felt a strange tension in the air, as if the silence itself had weight. What is it? Karim asked. Zahir didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than before, almost uncertain for the first time. A warning, he said, or a promise. I'm not sure which. Layla stepped closer, her fingers hovering just above the symbol. For a moment, she hesitated, sensing that whatever this place had preserved was not just memory, but intention. Then, slowly, she touched the stone. The air seemed to shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her breath catch. Somewhere deep within the structure, something responded. Not a sound, not exactly, but a movement, like the echo of something long dormant, beginning to wake. Karim straightened, alert. Did you feel that? Zahir nodded, his eyes fixed on the stone. Yes, he said. And now we know why it survived. The city beneath the dust had not simply endured, it had waited. Chapter 7. The Door Beneath Silence. The entrance revealed itself, not as a doorway, but as an absence. Where the ground should have been solid, it dipped. Zahir stopped at its edge, brushing away dust. Beneath, stone emerged, not scattered, not broken, placed, deliberate. Layla knelt beside him, tracing the edge. This isn't ruin, she said. This was sealed. Karim set the cart down. Sealed things are meant to stay closed, he stated. Zahir turned, his eyes steady. Or meant to be opened by the right people. No visible handle, no inscription. Only a slab of stone, smooth yet worn. At its center, faint lines formed a precise pattern. Layla leaned closer. Geometry, she murmured. Not decoration. This is a key. Then use it, Karim said, his tone uncertain. She hesitated, not from fear, but recognition. These patterns implied knowledge, intention, a creator to be understood. She placed her hand at the center. Nothing happened. The desert returned, silent, indifferent. Then the stone shifted inward, as if breathing. A low, grinding sound followed. Dust fell as darkness revealed itself beneath. Karim took a step back. That's not a door, that's a warning. Zahir stepped forward. It's both. The air that rose from below was cooler, but heavier. It carried no scent of decay, no rot, no life, only stillness. They descended slowly. The passage was narrow at first, forcing them into single file. Layla lit a small oil lamp, its flame flickering against walls that were too smooth to be natural. This place had been carved, engineered. Who builds something like this? Karim whispered. No one who expects to leave, Layla replied. The passage opened into a chamber, not large, not grand, but precise. The walls were covered in carvings, not stories, but symbols, repeating structures, lines intersecting at angles that suggested measurement rather than meaning. Zahir moved slowly along the wall, his hand hovering just above the surface. This wasn't meant to be seen, he said. It was meant to be understood. Layla's eyes scanned the patterns, her mind racing. It's a system, she said. A language but not of words, of relationships. Karim frowned. That doesn't make it better. At the center of the chamber stood a structure cylindrical, waist-high, carved from a darker stone. Its surface was smoother than the walls, untouched by erosion. Waiting, Zahir approached it. Don't, Karim said immediately. We don't know what it is. Zahir paused, but only briefly. That's why we're here. He placed his hand on the surface. This time, the response was immediate. The symbols on the walls began to shift, not physically, but in light. Lines glowed faintly, tracing paths across the chamber. The air seemed to tighten, as if the space itself were aligning. Layla stepped back, eyes wide. It's activating. Karim grabbed her arm. Then we should leave. But Zahir didn't move. The cylinder pulsed, one soft, controlled. Then again, the patterns intensified, converging toward the center, toward him. And then silence. The chamber returned to stillness. Karim exhaled sharply. That's it. That's what we risked everything for. Layla didn't answer. She was staring at Zahir. Something changed, she said. Zahir slowly lifted his hand. His expression was different, now not surprised, not afraid, but focused, as if something had become clear. It wasn't a door, he said quietly. It was a test. Karim shook his head. Of what? Zahir looked around the chamber once more, then back at the entrance above now, just a distant square of light. Of whether we were ready to understand what comes next. Layla felt it to now, not in the walls, not in the symbols, but in the space between moments. A shift, subtle, but real. Whatever this place was, it had not been waiting for just anyone, and whatever had just been activated was not finished. The silence after the activation was not empty. It carried weight. Not the stillness of abandonment, but the quiet that follows recognition as something hidden revealed itself. Layla stood motionless, her mind tracing fading lines on the walls. They were gone, erased, but she knew better. Patterns like that didn't disappear. They transferred. You saw it too, she said softly. Zahir nodded. Not with my eyes. Karim exhaled sharply, pacing. Then maybe you should explain it in a way the rest of us can understand. Layla looked at the central structure. It wasn't just reacting to touch, she said. It was mapping something, aligning information. Information about what? Karim asked. Zahir answered. Not what, who. Karim stopped. No. Yes, Zahir said calmly. This place evaluates continuity. Layla's brow furrowed. Continuity of what? Zahir replied. Of thinking, of building, of carrying forward what was lost. Karim shook his head. This whole place, it's not a tomb. No, Layla said. It's a filter. The word lingered. A system designed not to preserve everything, but to ensure only certain things survived. She turned back to the walls, stepping closer. Those symbols, they weren't instructions. They were relationships, cause and effect, structure and failure, growth and collapse. Her fingers hovered. It's a model of a civilization. Sahir nodded once, and we just triggered it. Karim crossed his arms. And what happens if we fail this filter? Zahir didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the far wall, where the carvings were densest. He placed his hand lightly against the surface, not to activate it, but to feel it. Then it stays buried, he said, like it was meant to. Layla's eyes narrowed slightly. And if we pass? Zahir looked back at her. Then it doesn't just show us the past. It gives us something we don't have. Karim let out a dry laugh. And what exactly is that? Zahir's answer came without hesitation. A way forward. The chamber seemed smaller now, not physically, but conceptually. It was no longer just a hidden structure. It was a threshold. Layla felt it clearly. They had not come here to discover something. They had come here to be evaluated by it. She stepped toward the center again, more deliberately. If it's a system, she said, then it has stages. The activation wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Karim looked at her, wary. You want to trigger it again? No, she said. I think it's already running. Sahir's gaze sharpened slightly. Explain. Layla gestured toward the walls. The first response was visual, patterns, alignment. That was the system, reading us, mapping how we interpret structure. But now, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Now it's waiting for input. Karim frowned. We already gave it input. Not intentionally, Layla replied. That was just presence, recognition. Now it wants interaction. Zahir studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Then we give it what it's asking for. Karim sighed. Of course we do. Layla moved along the wall, scanning the carvings again. Not as images, but as systems. She began to notice repetition, not exact, but relational. Variation, testing. Her hand stopped at a particular section, less complex than the others, but more focused. A sequence of intersecting lines, forming a closed shape. This one, she said. Zahir approached. Why? Because it's incomplete. Karim blinked. That's your reason? Layla shook her head. No, it's designed to be completed. She reached out in this time. Instead of simply touching the wall, she traced the missing connection with her finger. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the chamber responded, not with light, with sound. A low, resonant tone filled the space, not loud, but precise. It vibrated through the stone, through the air, through them. Karim stiffened. That's new. The tone shifted slightly higher, then lower, then stabilizing. The walls did not glow this time, but something deeper changed. The carvings seemed sharper, more defined, as if the system had accepted the input. Zahir's voice was quiet, but certain. That was a response. Layla stepped back slowly. It's not just testing recognition, she said. It's testing completion. Whether we can take something broken and make it whole. Karim looked around the chamber, his earlier skepticism thinning. And how many of those incomplete pieces are there? Layla didn't answer, because she was already counting. Too many, Zahir exhaled slowly. Then this isn't a single test. No, Layla said. It's a sequence. Karim gave a tired smile. Of course it is. Zahir turned toward the passage leading back up. The light from above was still there, but it felt distant now, almost irrelevant. We don't solve it all today, he said. That's not the point. Layla looked at him. Then what is? Zahir's answer came with quiet clarity. #way forward, as if it had shifted from observation to engagement. Layla took one last look at the wall she had completed. The pattern remained, not erased, not reset, accepted, and that, more than anything, confirmed it. This place did not erase progress, it accumulated it. Karim picked up the lamp, glancing toward the passage. So what now? Sahir turned, his expression no longer uncertain. Now, he said, we decide whether we're the kind of people this place was waiting for. Layla followed his gaze upward, toward the faint square of light. For the first time since they arrived, she understood something clearly. This wasn't about the past. It never had been. It was about whether the future deserved to exist at all. The tone did not fade. It stabilized. What had begun as a vibration now held form steady, controlled, deliberate. It filled the chamber without overwhelming it, like a signal rather than a warning. Layla kept her hand against the wall. It's responding to correction, she said quietly. Zahir stepped closer, eyes fixed on the pattern she had completed. Not correction, he said, continuation. Karim looked between them, uneasy. You draw one line and the whole place starts humming like it's alive. And you're telling me that's a good sign? Layla didn't answer immediately. The wall beneath her fingers began to change, not physically shifting, but revealing depth. The lines she had traced extended beyond the surface, branching into a network she hadn't seen before. What had looked like a single pattern was only a fragment, a node. It's opening layers, she whispered. Sahir nodded slowly. Then don't stop. Karim took a step back. That's exactly when you should stop. But Layla was already moving. Her hand followed the newly revealed paths, tracing connections that felt less like guesswork, more like recalls, if the logic was not foreign, but dormant within her. Each completed line triggered a subtle shift in the tone, refining it, sharpening it. The chamber was no longer silent. It was thinking. This isn't random, she said. It's testing coherence. If the structure we build aligns with its internal model, it continues. And if it doesn't, Karim pressed. Zahir answered this time, then it rejects it. Karim's jaw tightened. Define reject. Because at that moment, Layla hesitated. She had reached a junction, 3 possible paths extending outward from a single point, each one logically consistent on its own, each one incompatible with the others. A decision point. The tone shifted subtly, but enough to signal expectation. It's not just about understanding, Layla said, her voice quieter now. It's about choosing. Karim folded his arms. Then choose the safest one. Layla shook her head. There isn't one. Zahir stepped beside her, studying the junction. What do you see? Layla exhaled slowly. 3 outcomes. 3 ways a system like this evolves. She pointed to the first path. This one prioritizes stability, everything reinforced, nothing allowed to deviate. Then the second. This one favors expansion, growth, adaptation, but with higher risk of collapse. Finally, the third, and this one, she paused. This one balances both, but it's the most fragile. It depends on constant adjustment. Karim didn't hesitate. Then, not that one. Layla glanced at him. Why? Because fragile systems break. Zahir's eyes remained on the wall. Stable systems stagnate, he said. Expansive systems overreach. Layla felt the weight of it settle. This wasn't just a test of logic. It was a test of philosophy. What did they choose? Karim asked. Zahir answered quietly. You're looking at the result? Layla's gaze dropped for a moment. A lost city beneath the dust. A civilization that had built something to outlast itself, and still vanished. No option had saved them, which meant the question wasn't which path avoided failure. It was which path justified the risk. The tone shifted. Time, in whatever form this system understood it, was not infinite. Layla raised her hand. "Wait," Karim said. "Think about this." "I am," she replied. "No, you're about to decide for all of us." Layla looked at him, her expression steady. "That's exactly what this is testing." Zahir didn't intervene. He only watched. Layla turned back to the wall. Her fingers hovered over the three paths. Then she chose. Not the safest, not the most aggressive, the balanced one. Her hand moved with precision, completing the connection. For a fraction of a second, nothing. Then the tone changed. Not louder, clearer. The vibration aligned, smoothing into something almost harmonic. The chamber responded not with chaos, not with rejection, but with acceptance. Karim exhaled, tension releasing from his shoulders. "So, that worked." Zahir's voice was low. "For now." Layla stepped back, her eyes scanning the wall as new patterns unfolded from the choice she had made. The system was expanding again, but differently this time. More complex, more interconnected. "It's not done," she said. "No," Zahir agreed. "It's escalating." Karim let out a tired laugh. "Of course it is." The chamber seemed to deepen not in space, but in implication. What had begun as a test of recognition had become a test of judgment. And now something shifted again. At the center of the room, the cylinder reactivated, not with light, with movement. A thin seam appeared along its surface, splitting it vertically, slowly, precisely. It opened, revealing a hollow interior. Inside, there was no mechanism, no artifact, only a single, dark surface, smooth, reflective, and impossibly still. Layla stepped closer, cautious. "What is it?" Karim asked. Zahir's answer came with quiet certainty. "The next question." Layla looked into it. At first, she saw nothing, then her own reflection. But not as she was, as she could become. Not older, not stronger, different. Her expression hardened slightly. "It's not showing the future," she said. "It's showing potential." Karim frowned. "That's worse." Zahir stepped beside her, looking into the surface as well. His reflection did not match hers. It shifted, subtly but undeniably. "It's individualized," he said. "The system is no longer testing structure." Layla understood immediately. "It's testing us." The chamber fell into a deeper silence, not empty, expectant, because whatever came next would not be solved together. It would be faced alone. Chapter 10: The Weight of Choice. The harmony did not bring relief, it brought clarity. The chamber, once reactive, now felt anticipatory, as if the system had moved beyond testing simple comprehension. The patterns along the walls no longer appeared fragmented or exploratory. They were converging toward a single structure. Layla stepped back slowly, her eyes tracking the shifting lines. "It's building something," she said. "Not just evaluating us anymore." Zahir stood still at the center, his posture composed but alert. "A model," he replied, "or a projection?" Karim glanced around, uneasy. Projection of what? Neither of them answered immediately, because the answer was forming in front of them. The walls began to dim not into darkness, but into contrast. The glowing lines reassembled themselves, no longer scattered, but unified into a coherent form. It wasn't flat, it had depth, a structure suspended in light, a city, not the ruined one above them, but something more complete. Towers, pathways, intersections, each defined not by stone, but by relationships of space and function. It was not a memory, it was an ideal. Layla's voice dropped to a whisper. This is what they were trying to build. Karim stared at it, his skepticism faltering for the first time. Or what they thought they built. Zahir stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the structure. No, he said. This is what they failed to sustain. The distinction mattered. Layla moved alongside him, studying the projection. It's not static, she said. It's responsive. As if in confirmation, parts of the structure shifted subtly at first. Pathways reconfigured, sections expanded, others contracted. The system was simulating change, testing resilience. It's running scenarios, Zahir said, applying the logic we chose. Karim crossed his arms, watching the city evolve. So this is the result of your balanced decision. Layla didn't respond defensively. Not the result, she said, the beginning. The projection intensified, variable sound scene, but implied began to influence the structure. One section of the city expanded rapidly. For a moment, it looked efficient, productive. Then it destabilized. Connections fractured. Entire segments collapsed inward. The structure, unable to support its own expansion. Karim nodded once. That would have been the second path. Layla's eyes remained fixed. Yes. The system reset not completely, but partially reconstructing the city with different parameters. This time, the structure reinforced itself. Growth slowed. Connections thickened. Redundancy increased. Stability. For a while, it held. Then something else happened. Nothing. No expansion. No adaptation. The system endured, but did not evolve. Over time, pressure built at its edges. Unmet demands, unabsorbed change, and eventually it cracked. Zahir spoke quietly. The first path. Layla swallowed, tension rising in her chest, which leaves the system shifted again. This time, the structure grew but cautiously. Expansion occurred in measured increments. Each new segment adjusted. Feedback loops formed, correcting imbalance, redistributing strain. It was slower, more complex, and for a moment, it worked. Karim leaned forward slightly. So, that's it. That's the right answer. Layla didn't look convinced. Watch. The projection continued. External pressures unseen, but implied, began to act upon the structure. Resources strained. Connections overloaded. The system adapted again and again, recalibrating itself. But each adjustment came at a cost. Complexity increased. Dependency deepened. And then a delay. Just a fraction of a moment. But enough. One adjustment came too late. A single node failed. Then another. The system tried to compensate, but the balance it depended on made it vulnerable. What had once been its strength became its weakness. Cascade. The structure didn't collapse all at once. It unraveled, silently, inevitably. The projection dimmed. The chamber returned to stillness. Karim exhaled slowly, the weight of what he'd seen settling in. So none of them work. Zahir didn't move. Not permanently, he said. Layla's voice was quieter now, more introspective. That wasn't the point. Karim frowned. Then what is? Layla turned back to the central structure, the cylinder that had started all of this. It's not asking us to find a perfect system, she said. It's asking if we understand why systems fail. Zahir nodded once. And whether we can accept that failure is not the end of the process, but part of it. Karim let out a dry breath. That's a harsh lesson for something buried under the desert. Zahir's gaze lifted slightly toward the distant opening above. Not harsh, he said. Honest. The chamber felt different now. Not active, not waiting, resolved, as if the system had reached a conclusion. Not about the structures they had built within it, but about them. Layla felt it clearly. They had not passed, but they had not failed either. They had understood, and that, perhaps, was the only condition that mattered. A low sound echoed, so faint it could almost be imagined. A shift, not in the walls, but beneath them. Karim stiffened. Tell me, that's part of the test. Zahir didn't answer immediately. His expression had changed again, with confusion, but with recognition. No, he said quietly. It's what comes after. The ground trembled just enough to be undeniable. Layla's eyes widened slightly. The system. It's done evaluating. Karim looked between them. Then, what is it doing now? Zahir's voice was steady. Deciding what to do with us. The light above flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin, drifting lines. And somewhere deep within the structure, something began to open. Chapter 11. The Threshold of Meaning. Nothing in the chamber moved, and yet everything had changed. The structure along the walls was now complete. Not as a physical object, but an alignment. Lines, symbols, and invisible connections converged into a single, coherent system. Final, Layla felt it before she understood it. Like a shift in gravity, her hand hovered just short of the surface where the last line had settled. It's waiting, she whispered. Zahir's voice was low. Not for action. Karim frowned. Then for what? Zahir turned, his gaze toward Layla, for recognition. The word lingered. Layla exhaled slowly. Recognition of what? No one answered. The answer was present, not in the walls, but in their path. Every choice, every hesitation, recorded, not as data, as intention. The chamber had not been testing knowledge, it had been measuring alignment. Karim shook his head, uneasy. This place wasn't built to keep people out, Zahir replied. It was built to ensure only certain people could proceed, and we passed. Karim asked. Zahir did not answer. Layla stepped forward. The surface in front of her did not look different, but she knew this was the point of completion, or perhaps the point of decision. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she understood. This isn't a door, she said. Zahir's voice followed, quiet and certain. No. Layla closed her eyes. The patterns she had seen before returned in her mind, clearer now. Not as scattered fragments, but as a whole, a structure of relationships, of choices, of consequences that extended beyond a single moment. And at the center of it a question, not spoken, not written, but unmistakable. Do you continue? Layla opened her eyes. Karim shifted behind her. Layla, his voice carried something new, not urgency, not doubt, concern. If this is a choice, he said, then we should understand what we're choosing. Layla nodded slightly. We do. Karim frowned. No, we don't. We don't know what's on the other side. Zahir spoke, his tone steady. That is the point. Karim exhaled sharply. That's not an answer. It is, Zahir said. Just not one you're comfortable with. Silence returned. But it was no longer neutral. It pressed. Layla looked at the surface again. Her reflection was faint, distorted by the stone. For a moment, she did not see herself clearly, only outlines. Possibilities. Everything we've seen, she said slowly. Everything this place has shown us. It's not about knowledge. It's about what we do with it. Zahir inclined his head. Yes. Karim looked between them. And if we choose wrong, Layla did not hesitate. Then we live with it. The answer was simple, unavoidable. Her hand moved forward. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. No light, no sound, no resistance. Then contact. The chamber did not react immediately. There was no surge, no collapse, no visible shift. Instead, something far subtler occurred. The stillness deepened, as if the space itself was acknowledging the choice. The lines on the walls did not reappear. They did not need to, because whatever had been measured was complete. Karim swallowed. That's it. Zahir's gaze remained fixed ahead. No. The air changed. Not in pressure, not in temperature, but in orientation. The chamber no longer felt enclosed. The boundaries seemed to dissolve. Not physically, but perceptually. Layla blinked. The wall in front of her did not open. It receded, not moving away, but losing its status as a barrier. Beyond it, something vast began to take shape. Not as a landscape, not as a structure, but as an extension of the same system, only larger, infinitely larger. Karim stepped back instinctively. What is that? Zahir answered quietly. The next scale. Layla did not move. Her fear had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer about what might happen to her. It was about what might happen because of her. She lowered her hand. The connection remained. The chamber, the patterns, the system, they had all led to this point, a transition. And like all transitions, it required something in return, not effort, not knowledge, commitment. Layla turned slightly, just enough to see Karim. You don't have to come. Karim let out a short breath, almost a laugh. After all this, his expression softened, but his eyes were steady. I'm already here. Zahir did not turn. He simply stepped forward, and the space in front of them accepted him. Not with light, not with sound, but with absence, as if he had moved into something that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. Layla followed, not because she understood everything, but because she understood enough. Behind them, the chamber did not close. It remained silent, complete, as if it had never needed them to stay, only to choose. The system did not ask again. It had already received its answer. The chamber grew still in a way that felt irreversible, not the silence of pause, but the silence of completion. The lines along the walls no longer shifted or reacted. They had settled into their final configuration, a structure no longer forming, no longer testing, no longer waiting. It was done. Layla slowly lowered her hand, her breath steady now, though her mind was anything but. It's not responding, she said. Zahir shook his head gently, because there is nothing left to respond to. Karim turned in a slow circle, scanning the chamber, as if expecting anything to happen next. So that's it, he asked. We came all this way, and the result is silence. Zahir stepped forward, placing his palm against the central surface where the alignment had completed. Not silence, he said. Resolution. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, almost imperceptibly, the air shifted, not outward, inward. The presence they had felt, the intelligence, the system, the pattern that had guided them began to withdraw. Not abruptly, not vanishing, but receding, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Layla closed her eyes. She could feel it leaving, or perhaps, more accurately, she could feel it letting go. It's not shutting down, she said slowly. It's releasing. Zahir nodded. Its purpose is complete. Karim frowned. And what was that purpose? To test us, to judge us. Layla opened her eyes, looking not at the walls, but at the empty space between them. No, she said. To be understood. The realization settled heavily between them. All of it, the patterns, The responses, the resistance, had not been barriers. They had been language, and they had just finished reading it. A faint sound echoed through the chamber, not mechanical, not structural, but something softer, almost like a breath. The last trace of the system, as it withdrew completely, leaving behind no active presence, no guiding force, only the structure, only the memory. The walls, once alive with shifting lines, were now still stone again. But the stillness no longer felt empty. It felt preserved. Zahir stepped back, removing his hand. "It won't activate again," he said. Karim crossed his arms. "How can you be sure?" "Because it no longer needs to," Layla answered. She turned slowly, taking in every detail of the chamber, the angles, the surfaces, the places where patterns had once appeared. She knew, with a certainty she couldn't fully explain, that nothing here would respond to them again. But that didn't mean it was gone. It didn't disappear, she said quietly. It changed state. Zahir looked at her, a faint trace of approval in his expression. From system to knowledge. Karim exhaled. "That sounds like a poetic way of saying we can't use it anymore." Layla shook her head. "No, it means we carry it now." That was the final shift, not in the chamber, but in them. The system had not been a machine in the way they had first assumed. It had no interest in control, no desire for preservation. It had existed to complete a cycle, to find minds capable of interpreting it, continuing it, and ultimately releasing it. Zahir moved toward the entrance, where the sealed path had first opened. The passage remained unchanged, leading back to the surface. "To leave is part of the design," he said. Karim hesitated. "And if we stay," Zahir didn't turn back, "then we misunderstand everything we've just learned." Layla lingered for a moment longer. She stepped toward the center, placing her hand where the final alignment had once been active. The stone was cool, unremarkable, silent, and yet she could still feel it, not as a presence, but as understanding. She smiled faintly. Then she turned and followed the others. As they walked back through the passage, the light from above grew gradually stronger, the dust-filled air of the surface world beginning to reclaim them. The chamber behind them remained exactly as it wasn't changed, unmoving and undisturbed, but not forgotten, never forgotten. When they emerged, the wind was still there, sweeping across the plain as it always had. The dust rose and fell in endless motion, covering and uncovering the land in quiet cycles. Karim looked back once, then shook his head. No one would ever know what's down there. Layla adjusted her scarf, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "They don't need to." Zahir stood beside them, his gaze distant. "Some things are not meant to be found," he said. "Only understood, erasing the path, leaving no trace." But beneath the dust, the structure remained, and within them, so did the pattern. The desert did not remember names, it remembered weight. Long after voices faded and footsteps erased, something remained, not in form, not in structure, but in imprint, the kind that could not be seen unless one knew how to look, and could not be understood unless one was willing to listen. Layla stood at the edge of the excavation site as the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon. The chamber beneath them had sealed itself, again not collapsing, not destroyed, but closed, as if completing a cycle that had begun long before any of them were born. No trace of the entrance remained, no markings, no indication that anything had ever been there. And yet she knew they all did. Karim adjusted the straps of his pack, glancing once more at the ground. where history had briefly opened itself. "So that's it?" he asked. "We just walk away?" Zahir did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the horizon, where light and dust blurred. "Nothing we touched was meant to be taken," he said at last. "Only understood." Layla exhaled slowly. That word "understood" carried more weight now than it ever had before. What they had encountered was not a relic, not a lost civilization in the conventional sense. It had not offered knowledge as something to possess, nor power as something to wield. It had offered something far more difficult: recognition. The patterns they had traced were not instructions, they were reflections, not of the past but of the mind that sought to interpret it. The system had not tested their intelligence. It had tested their alignment, their restraint, their ability to engage without consuming, and in the end, it had not chosen them. They had chosen themselves. The wind moved again, soft but persistent, lifting grains of sand into the air. Already, the surface of the ground was smoothing, reshaping, returning to its familiar anonymity. Soon, even they would begin to doubt what they had seen, question the clarity of memory, the precision of sensation. That, too, was part of it. Zahir turned away first, not in dismissal, but in acceptance. There was nothing left to uncover here. No deeper chamber, no hidden mechanism waiting to be activated. The meaning had not been buried in layers of stone. It had been revealed in layers of choice. Karim followed, quieter than before. The questions he carried had not disappeared, but they had changed. They no longer pressed for answers. They waited. Layla remained a moment longer. Her eyes moved across the horizon, tracing no visible pattern, and yet sensing one all the same, not in the ground beneath her, but in the way she now saw the world beyond it. Every structure, every system, every story passed down and reshaped over time, all of them, in some way, incomplete. Not because something was missing, but because something was always being added. She turned at last, stepping away from the place that would leave no trace of her presence. The wind moved behind her, erasing the final imprint of her steps almost as soon as they were made. But this time, she did not look back, because she understood now, not everything that disappears is lost, and not everything that remains is meant to be found.